I never imagined that a single piece of paper scribbled in childish handwriting and folded into four, stained slightly with grape juice, would be what saved me from losing my children. But there I was, in the cold, merciless courtroom, heart thudding in my ears, while my ex-wife sat across from me with that smug smile she wore whenever she thought she'd already won. She had dragged me into court with accusations that painted me as an unfit father, a drunk, a neglectful parent, a danger to my own kids. Lies. All of them. But she had money, connections, and a ruthless lawyer who made me look like I was already holding a bottle in one hand and a custody order in the other. For weeks, I had walked on broken glass, watching my kids get pulled deeper into her manipulations, their once bright eyes dimming with confusion and fear. Then, on the last day of the trial, my 10-year-old son, Luke, stood up while the judge was getting ready to announce the decision. Without asking permission, without waiting for anyone to acknowledge him, he walked forward, hand trembling as he held out the letter. "My dad didn't know I wrote this," he said quietly. "But I think you should read it." The courtroom went dead silent. Even my ex-wife froze, her confident expression faltering for the first time in weeks. The judge opened the letter, brow furrowing as his eyes scanned the words, and I felt everything shift like the tide turning after a long, brutal storm. That letter wasn't written in legalese. It didn't quote any experts, but it was raw, honest, and powerful in a way nothing else could have been. Luke had written about the nights I stayed up to help him with his nightmares, about the time I drove 5 hours just to see his school play, about how I never missed a soccer game even when I was sick, about how I taught him how to build a treehouse, how to ride a bike, how to say sorry when you really mean it. He ended it with, "My mom says bad things about my dad, but I know who he really is, and if you send me away from him, you'll be making a mistake." The judge put the letter down slowly, looked up, and the whole atmosphere in that courtroom shifted. My ex-wife's attorney tried to object, but it was too late. The truth had already spoken, and it came from the one voice they couldn't silence. Now, I want to take you back to how we got here, because this isn't just a story about a letter. It's about a war waged in silence, a parent's love under siege, and a child's courage that turned the tide. Before the courtroom drama, before the letter, before the betrayal that cracked my world in half, things between my ex and I were civil, at least on the surface. We had been separated for a year, and though the divorce itself had been painful, we had managed to keep things amicable for the kids, or so I thought. We'd agreed on shared custody. Luke and his little sister Mia would spend weekdays with their mother and weekends with me. I lived in a small but cozy house a few blocks from their school. It wasn't the fancy 2-story place my ex had gotten in the divorce, but it had warmth, it had stability, it had laughter. Every Friday night, we had pizza and movie marathons, built forts out of couch cushions, and told stories by flashlight. I thought we were doing okay. I thought we'd found balance. I thought wrong. The first crack appeared one Monday morning when I dropped Luke off at school. He was quiet, withdrawn, not his usual bubbly self. When I asked him what was wrong, he just said, "Mom said we shouldn't talk about you too much." I didn't want to stir the pot, so I let it go, chalking it up to post-divorce adjustment. But it wasn't just one time. Over the next few weeks, the changes in Luke and Mia became more obvious. They stopped bringing drawings they'd made at my place back to their mother's house. They started calling me David instead of Dad when telling stories about our weekends. And Luke, my brave, confident boy, started second-guessing himself. "Do you think I'm annoying?" he asked once, out of the blue, as we were building a Lego spaceship. My heart sank. That wasn't a normal question for a 10-year-old, not mine anyway. Things escalated the day I got an envelope in the mail with a court summons. My ex-wife was filing for full custody. The document read like a horror story starring me. Allegations of reckless behavior, emotional instability, and a supposed drinking problem that didn't exist. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the pages, hands shaking, not because I was afraid of losing to the lies, but because of who had written them. This wasn't just a custody battle. It was character assassination, and it was coming from someone who once vowed to love me forever. The woman I had built a life with was now tearing it down brick by brick, and she was using my kids as the wrecking ball. I tried to talk to her. I called. I texted. I even showed up at her door. She wouldn't answer. When she finally did respond through her lawyer, it was a cease and desist letter warning me not to harass her. I was stunned. Was this about money, pride? A new boyfriend whispering poison in her ear? I didn't know. All I knew was that she was turning my own children against me, and I was powerless to stop it, at least outside the court. I spent the next few weeks assembling legal counsel, scraping together money for the best family lawyer I could afford. Meanwhile, my time with the kids dwindled. My weekends were replaced by scheduling conflicts. Phone calls were unanswered. Video chats were cut short. I began to wonder what they were hearing about me on the other side. Were they being told I didn't care? That I didn't want them? That I had failed them somehow? Every unanswered text from Luke hit me like a slap. Every missed call with Mia felt like a loss I couldn't quantify. I kept all their old drawings taped to my fridge and read bedtime stories into a voice recorder, just in case they needed to hear my voice. When the court date arrived, I walked into that building with fire in my chest and ice in my veins. I had a folder full of receipts, photos, and character witnesses. I was ready to fight. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the real fight wouldn't be in the courtroom. It would be inside my children's hearts. And while I was battling lawyers and accusations, Luke was preparing his own defense, the one that would ultimately save us both. The courtroom became my battleground, but the real war was psychological, and my ex had no intention of playing fair. As soon as the proceedings began, she unleashed a well-rehearsed campaign of distortion and deceit. Her lawyer, a cold-eyed, sharp-tongued man named Roland Myers, painted a portrait of me that was entirely unrecognizable. Mr. David Hargrove, he said during opening remarks, has a history of emotional instability, consistent absenteeism, and documented alcohol abuse. He slid a file toward the judge with an air of authority, like it was the final nail in my coffin. I didn't even need to open it to know it was filled with misinterpreted receipts, hearsay, and outright fabrications. I sat there stunned, gripping the edge of the table like I might fall off the earth. My own lawyer tried to object, but the damage was done. I wasn't just defending my right to see my children, I was defending the very idea that I deserved to be a father. Over the next few days, the attacks kept coming. She brought in her sister to testify that she'd witnessed David drunk around the children. I hadn't touched alcohol since college. Her neighbor swore she saw me yelling at Luke once in the driveway. I remembered that day I was calling him back before he sprinted into the street chasing a basketball. Even that moment had been twisted into evidence of rage issues. My ex took the stand herself, wiping away fake tears as she told the court, "I'm scared for my children. I just want them to be safe." Safe? From me? The worst part wasn't what they said about me, it was what they didn't say about the truth. No one talked about how I picked up the pieces when she had postpartum depression so bad she couldn't get out of bed. No one mentioned the nights I fed Mia with one hand while rubbing Luke's back with the other because she had locked herself in the bathroom crying for hours. No one talked about how I took double shifts for 3 years so she could start her online business. I wasn't perfect, but I had been present, I had been loyal, and now I was being erased. The psychological toll hit hard. I started having chest pains, panic attacks. I couldn't sleep. Every time the phone rang, I thought it would be Child Protective Services or another emergency hearing. I was constantly afraid of losing them, of failing them, of not being enough. I stopped eating, dropped nearly 15 pounds in a month. My lawyer kept telling me, "Keep it together for the kids." But how do you keep it together when someone's gutting your soul with a smile? My only reprieve came during my court-approved visitation, short, stilted hours in a supervised setting that felt more like an interview than parenting. Luke barely spoke. Mia clung to my leg but didn't laugh like she used to. They looked at me like I was a ghost of the father they once knew. I tried to reconnect. I brought their favorite books, retold our inside jokes, asked about school. Luke would nod, smile faintly, but his eyes always drifted away like he was afraid to fully look at me. I didn't blame him. I blamed her. Then, one day, Luke slipped a note into my coat pocket during a supervised visit. I found it later that night. It read, "I don't believe her, I miss you, but I can't say that out loud." That note destroyed me and rebuilt me at the same time. He wasn't lost. He was scared. And suddenly, I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was fighting to save my kids from a narrative designed to make them forget who I really was. I doubled down. I stopped begging for explanations from my ex. I stopped reacting. Instead, I gathered character witnesses from coworkers, neighbors, even Luke's old soccer coach, who remembered how I showed up to every game, even the ones my son sat on the bench. I pulled out photos, video clips, school emails praising my involvement, receipts from family vacations, voice messages of bedtime stories I had sent Mia. I brought it all. I built a case not with words, but with memories. But even with all that, I knew the court system favored consistency. And since my ex had more money, a nicer home, and the sympathy of every woman on the jury who had ever been burned by a bad man, I was still at risk of losing everything. All the evidence I brought might not have been enough, but somewhere in that mess, in the background, Luke was writing a truth that would speak louder than any lawyer ever could. The letter that would change everything wasn't born from some grand epiphany or dramatic revelation. It was born in the quiet moments between confusion and pain, scribbled in the half-light of a child's bedroom while his world slowly collapsed around him. Luke later told me he wrote it over several nights, hunched over a spiral notebook with a pencil he kept hidden under his pillow. He was afraid that if anyone found it, they'd take it away. Afraid of what his mother would say. But he wrote it anyway, because somewhere deep in his 10-year-old heart, he understood that truth has a weight, and it needed to land somewhere it could finally be heard. I didn't know any of this at the time. All I knew was that my son had become quieter, more withdrawn. He no longer lit up when I picked him up during supervised visits. He never asked to stay a little longer. But his eyes, they lingered, like he was searching for something solid to hold on to in a house built on sand. I saw him watching me when I helped Mia tie her shoelaces, when I wiped pizza sauce off her chin, when I knelt down to his level to tell him I was proud of the story he wrote for class. He didn't say much, but he watched everything. Meanwhile, the court case dragged on like a slow hemorrhage. My ex's side pushed hard for full custody, citing a hostile environment and emotional volatility. They had a child psychologist testify that children thrive better in stable, maternal-led households. My attorney tried to argue that the psychologist had never even interviewed me, but it didn't matter. The narrative was set. Every step I took felt like it was on a floor greased by bias. I was losing, not just in court but in my own children's hearts, and that, more than any legal ruling, terrified me. Then came the night that Luke finally broke. It was the Tuesday before the final court session. He was in his room at his mother's house, listening through the wall as she spoke to someone on the phone, her boyfriend maybe, or her sister. She said something that made Luke stop breathing for a second. "I don't care what the kids think," she said, according to Luke. "They'll forget about him soon enough. Kids adjust. I'm their mother, that's all that matters." It wasn't just the words. It was how casually they were spoken, how sure she was that love was replaceable. Luke told me later he cried for 2 hours that night. He hugged Mia while she slept, then got out of bed and opened the notebook he'd hidden in his sock drawer. He ripped out the pages he didn't like, the ones where he was too angry, too sad, and then he wrote the version he would eventually hand to the judge. He wrote about how he missed building rockets with me in the garage, how he liked my pancakes better even though they were lumpy, how he always felt safe at my house even when the world felt upside down. He wrote that I never shouted, that I never told him he was too sensitive, like his mom did when he cried. He wrote about a time I stayed up all night with him because he had the flu and was scared he'd stop breathing, how I sat with a flashlight and read to him until he fell asleep. He ended the letter with a line that shattered me when I read it later. "My mom says my dad is bad, but if being bad means loving someone so much it hurts, then I hope I'm bad too." He didn't tell anyone about the letter, not even Mia. He folded it into a square and kept it in his backpack, zipped into the inner pocket where he kept his favorite Pokemon card. He waited until the last day of court. He waited until everything else had failed. He waited until the judge was about to hand down the decision that could have taken me away from him forever. That's when he stood up. No permission, no warning, just courage. He stepped into the silence like a warrior and held out the letter. "My dad didn't know I wrote this," he said, "but I think you should read it. My lawyer tried to intervene. My ex's lawyer nearly exploded. But the judge took the letter. And in that instant, the sterile courtroom became something else entirely. It became sacred. Because the words weren't from an adult with an agenda, they were from a child who had seen too much, endured too much, and finally found a way to speak his truth. The moment the judge unfolded Luke's letter, everything shifted. You could feel it in the room, the way everyone seemed to inhale at once and forget to exhale. It was like a pin had dropped into a pool of tension, rippling outward until even the bailiff leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the paper in the judge's hand. My ex's attorney immediately objected, citing procedure and unverified emotional testimony, but the judge, a stern, silver-haired man named Judge Klein, raised one hand and silenced the room with a glance. "I'll allow it," he said, voice low but resolute. "The child has been directly affected by this case. We will hear him." And just like that, a 10-year-old boy who hadn't spoken a full sentence in court before that day became the most powerful voice in the room. As the judge read, his expression changed in slow degrees, first neutral, then furrowed, then something softer. Not pity, not sadness, something more human. When he finished, he set the letter down carefully, as if it were glass. "Would you like to say anything else, Luke?" he asked. My son looked around the room at his mother, then at me. His eyes lingered on mine. "I just want to live somewhere where I'm not scared to say I love both my parents," he said. "But I feel like I can only say it at Dad's house." Gasps, audible ones, even a juror dabbed their eye with a tissue. My ex-wife's face turned a shade of pale I hadn't seen since the birth of our daughter, when she lost too much blood, and I had to beg the nurse not to let her fall asleep. But now, it wasn't physical weakness, it was exposure. The kind of vulnerability that happens when a carefully constructed lie begins to split at the seams. She opened her mouth, likely to deny, spin, or redirect. But the judge held up a hand again. "Mrs. Cartwright," he said, his tone razor-sharp, "do you dispute the authenticity of this letter?" "No," she said, voice brittle, "but he's just a child. He doesn't understand the full picture." "He understands love," the judge replied. "He understands fear, and that's more than most adults in this courtroom seem to grasp." My attorney, normally composed, gave me a sidelong look of disbelief, then leaned over and whispered, "This changes everything." And it did. Because from that point forward, the trial was no longer about character assassination or financial leverage. It was about the truth, and the truth had spoken in unfiltered pencil strokes on ruled notebook paper. Judge Klein requested an in-camera interview with Luke the following day, just the two of them in a quiet chamber, away from the noise and legal theatrics. My ex-wife tried to object again, arguing that I might have coached him, but Luke shut that down before the judge could respond. "He didn't even know I wrote it," he said. I didn't show anyone. That statement, the simple finality of it, landed like a hammer on the coffin of her credibility. That evening I sat in my car outside my lawyer's office, shaking. I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream, sob, or sleep for 10 years. Everything I had been holding in, the fear, the heartbreak, the guilt, threatened to spill out all at once. My lawyer called me inside, and for the first time since this began, his voice had an edge of optimism. "The judge has requested a psychological evaluation for both parties," he said. "That wouldn't have happened unless he was seriously reconsidering custody arrangements." My ex was livid. I saw her the next morning in the parking lot, screaming into her phone while Luke clutched Mia's hand beside her. Her mask had finally slipped, revealing the fury she had tried so hard to mask with courtroom tears and designer suits. "This is your fault," she hissed at Luke. I wasn't close enough to hear everything, but I saw the way he flinched. I was out of the car and across the lot before I knew what I was doing. "Get in," I told him, my voice calm but shaking. "Now." She threatened to call the police. I didn't care. Luke and Mia climbed into the car, and for the first time, I saw the faintest flicker of hope in their eyes. Later that day, I got the email. Court would reconvene in 2 days for a final decision. Everything, the months of turmoil, the thousands of dollars, the endless character attacks, would come down to one final hearing. I was exhausted, but I wasn't broken. Because Luke had shown me that even in the most twisted systems, A child's voice could still cut through the noise. And as I tucked Mia into bed that night and read her the same story I'd recorded on my phone weeks earlier, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: resolve. Not the desperate kind that came from survival, but the grounded kind that comes from knowing your children still know who you are, even when the world tries to convince them otherwise. The day of the final hearing felt different. Not quieter, not calmer, but heavier. The air inside the courtroom carried weight, as if everyone sensed this was the endgame. No one shuffled papers, no one cleared throats. Even the court stenographer's fingers seemed to move more carefully. Judge Klein entered with the same stoicism he had shown every day prior, but his eyes gave something away, focus sharpened to a blade's edge. He was ready to end this. And though I didn't know it at the time, the events of that day would permanently redraw the boundaries of my life. We began with the follow-up on the psychological evaluations ordered after Luke's letter. The therapist, Dr. Marlene Keir, took the stand first. A woman of few words and many degrees, she walked the courtroom through her findings with a calm, surgical clarity that made the gallery sit forward in their seats. Mr. Hargrove exhibits signs of acute stress disorder, she stated, consistent with ongoing legal trauma and character defamation, but no indication of instability or substance dependency. She looked up then, directly at my ex-wife. There is, however, a pattern of manipulative behavior and emotional coercion evident in the statements from both children during private interviews, especially from the mother's side. My ex's face tightened like a wire pulled taut. She didn't blink, didn't breathe, but her fingers twitched just once as she folded her arms. Dr. Keir continued, Luke, in particular, demonstrates signs of parentification. He feels responsible for protecting his younger sister from the tension between his parents. He associates his father with calm, emotional validation and his mother with conditional approval. This is not healthy for a 10-year-old. There was a pause, a long one. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, Luke requested I not tell his mother he said that. That tells us everything we need to know. You could hear a pin drop. Judge Klein asked a few measured questions. Was the child's testimony consistent over time? Yes. Was it influenced? No. Would the recommendation support joint custody? No, Your Honor, Dr. Keir said. I recommend primary custody be granted to Mr. Hargrove with supervised visitation for the mother until such time as trust can be reestablished. The children need a safe emotional environment. That is not currently being provided by the mother's residence. My ex nearly exploded. She stood up, protesting, yelling through clenched teeth, This is insane. She only spoke to us for 20. The judge struck his gavel sharply. Sit down, Mrs. Cartwright. You will have your chance to speak. She sat, barely holding in her fury, but I could see the unraveling. It wasn't just the therapist's words, it was the fact that Luke had made her fortress of control vulnerable. Then, the judge made a decision that even I wasn't prepared for. I want to speak with Luke again, in chambers. But this time, I want both parents to witness. No lawyers. Just us and the child. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure if that was legal, but no one objected. Maybe they knew, as I did, that this was the only way to cut through the remaining fog. Inside Judge Klein's private chambers, I sat on one end of the long leather couch. My ex sat on the other, arms crossed like she was still in the middle of a boardroom standoff. Luke was ushered in. He looked smaller than usual, but there was something in his eyes, an echo of the boy who used to build Lego cities on our living room floor and dream about becoming an astronaut. The judge pulled up a chair and sat across from him, casual but firm. Luke, I want you to pretend we're just talking. No pressure, no one's in trouble, but this is your chance to help me understand what's really going on. Luke looked between us. At me he smiled just slightly. At her his lips pressed into a line. Then he spoke, quietly at first, then louder, as if each word made him braver. I feel like I have to lie to Mom to keep her happy. When I talk about Dad, she gets mad or sad or says he's pretending to care. But he's not. He does care. He always has. My ex interjected, but the judge raised a hand. Let him finish. Luke continued, At Dad's house, I don't feel like I'm in the middle of a fight. I can read. I can sleep. I don't have to be careful with my words. Mia doesn't cry as much there. We feel normal." He turned to the judge, and for the first time, I saw his eyes fill with tears. "Please don't send me back to where I have to pretend all the time. I don't want to pick sides. But if I have Toif, someone has Toothin, I pick Dad." My ex sobbed. She wasn't acting this time. But it wasn't the sob of heartbreak. It was the sob of someone realizing they'd lost control. Not because I had won, but because her own son had seen through the fog. The judge nodded and stood. "Thank you, Luke. You've been braver than most adults I've met." That moment sealed it. I knew it. My lawyer knew it. Even she knew it. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Klein didn't take long. He addressed the room, his voice solemn but resolute. "In consideration of testimony, psychological evaluations, and the child's direct input, I find that it is in the best interest of the children to be placed under the primary custody of Mr. Hargrove." A pause. "Supervised visitation rights will be granted to Mrs. Cartwright, with ongoing evaluation." I didn't cry out right away. I just sat still, absorbing the sentence like medicine I didn't realize I needed. Luke reached for my hand. That was the moment the tears came for the victory, but for the relief. For the exhale I hadn't been able to release for over a year. Winning custody wasn't the end, it was a beginning, a door creaking open after months of pounding against it with bloodied fists. The moment the gavel fell and the judge declared me the primary guardian, it felt as though the weight I had been carrying, an invisible anvil strapped to my chest, lifted just enough for me to breathe. But it wasn't celebration I felt. It was a strange, trembling stillness, because healing doesn't come with a court order. It doesn't arrive in a manila envelope stamped with state approval. Healing creeps in quietly, like sunlight at the edge of a storm, and you don't even realize it's happening until the shadows start to look less sharp. I remember driving home that day with Luke and Mia in the back seat. Luke hummed under his breath, some video game theme he'd gotten stuck in his head for months. Mia asked if we could get ice cream. "Of course," I said, even though I didn't have the cash for it. That wasn't the point. The point was the way Luke looked at me in the rearview mirror, eyes wide open, no flinch, no fear. Like he finally believed this wasn't a dream we'd wake up from. The first week was hard. Luke kept checking the windows before bed. Mia had a meltdown when the school bus went by without stopping at her old house. They'd been conditioned to expect the rug to be pulled out from under them, to fear that every moment of peace was a setup for disappointment. I didn't force anything. We built a new routine together, small, sturdy rituals like Sunday pancakes, Wednesday library runs, and no phones Fridays. It wasn't about the activities. It was about showing them that consistency didn't have to come wrapped in control, that love didn't come with conditions. My ex fought the ruling in small, subtle ways. She dragged her feet on supervised visits, arrived late, cried in front of the kids, told them things like, "I'm sorry Daddy took you away from me." The damage was delicate like poison in small sips. But I documented everything. I kept my composure, not because I wanted to look good for the courts, but because I wanted my children to have one place in their lives where the temperature didn't suddenly drop. Where calm wasn't a temporary visitor but a permanent resident. Therapy helped. For all of us. Luke was hesitant at first. The thought counseling meant something was wrong with him. But after 3 sessions with a warm, patient woman named Dr. Foster, he started opening up. He talked about feeling like a referee in a game he never signed up for. He talked about how tired he was of pretending. Mia, sweet as ever, expressed her confusion in drawing scribbles of big crying stick figures and tiny smiling ones holding hands. We talked through every picture. We never dismissed a single one. One night, about 2 months after the ruling, Luke came into my room with his letter in his hand, the same one he gave the judge. "Can we frame it?" he asked. I was taken aback. "Why?" I said gently. He shrugged. "Because it helped us, and I want to remember I was brave. We went to the craft store the next day and bought the nicest frame we could afford." He hung it above his desk like a medal. And you know what? It was a medal. Not just for him, for all of us. That letter marked the turning point in a war none of us had chosen, but were forced to fight. It reminded me that sometimes the people with the smallest voices say the most important things, and it reminded me that love, when it's true, finds a way to speak even when the world tries to silence it. My ex continued her struggle for control in other ways, demanding unscheduled visits, accusing me of alienation when the kids didn't want to go back with her, filing complaints that got tossed before they hit the judge's desk, but she was unraveling. Not because she lost in court, but because she lost their trust. And trust isn't something you can sue for. You earn it. Or you lose it. 3 months later, the court revisited the visitation structure. Based on reports from the supervisor and ongoing notes from the therapist, they reduced her time even further. She stormed out of the courthouse. Luke didn't ask about her that week, neither did Mia. I didn't celebrate. I just took a deep breath, hugged them both, and made dinner like usual. Healing isn't loud. It's spaghetti on a Tuesday night. It's Mia falling asleep with her head on my shoulder during movie night. It's Luke finally asking if he could invite a friend over again. I've learned that being a father isn't about winning battles. It's about showing up when the smoke clears and building again, brick by brick, heart by heart. That letter, that tiny piece of paper, didn't just save us in court. It reminded me who I was, who we were, and who we still could be. And every morning when Luke runs past that framed letter on his way out the door, I watch him glance up at it just for a second and smile, because he knows without question that his voice mattered. And so does mine.